Good afternoon, everybody. It's really very much a pleasure to be here and to see many of the same faces that we saw in Denver, but also a number of new guests as well. So I'm going to present a little bit of information you've seen before, but updated information as well as we move along. But also talk a little bit about why we've done what we've done with this vaccine. As Steve just highlighted, it's not a simple grow it, kill it, put it in oil, and stick it in the muscle vaccine. And if you're going to vary from that process, it should be for a really good reason. And we believe for PRRS in particular, there's a really very good reason to change things. And then also, we believe we've come up with that process that helps to address those needs most specifically. And the first thing, I think that just last month, I happened to be in Gainesville, Florida, and I happened to, somebody said that, by the way, let's go outside and see if we can see the Falcon Heavy take off from where we were in Gainesville, Florida. And in point of fact, we saw the contrail from the Falcon Heavy take off. And so rushed back into my office and caught online the image. I don't know if any of you saw this, the image of both of the two boosters landing simultaneously on plan and on target. And it hit me at that time that I wouldn't have imagined 5 years ago that we'd be at this place today where we would be able to see that kind of technology all come together in one place. Not only that, but from a private company that's going to be able to deliver that kind of capability at a fraction of the cost that the government would. Maybe that last part is understandable, but the fact that, and I don't know if any of you saw this, but it was just absolutely beautiful. So it's a culmination, however, of an extraordinarily long period of investment and obviously lives that have gone into this into this industry. But I hope that you can begin to understand that we are at that point in the world of vaccinology and in veterinary vaccinology. This is a schematic I put together about 18 months ago or so, and it's already outdated. But this is a way that we're trying to demonstrate that whether you're using the whole organism, the virus or the bacteria, and looking at typical inactivation or modified live approaches or gene-deleted approaches of that modified live agent, or looking at subunits or various different presentations of that recombinant antigen, whether it's vectored or in DNA. There are veterinary vaccines on the market today, and more tomorrow and more the day after that, that have been able to use this advanced technology that we've put careers into in the last 20 years that you folks will be able to take advantage of in the marketplace. These are vaccines on the market in these areas. Human side is a completely different story, by the way. But it's taken us a really, really, really long time to get there. And most of you will recognize this being a highly detailed and stylized photo or portrait of Edward Jenner vaccinating the first child with cowpox, with vaccinia, 1796 some odd time. And we look at this as a hallmark. The first reported or first evidence, the Chinese say that they've got it before us, but the first reported evidence of the use of an attenuated, in this case, microorganism to be able to prevent a disease. And in fact, people have estimated that because of this, probably he's saved more lives than anyone else on the planet. 10% mortality from the disease at the time in Europe, as an example. But I think it's also important for us to keep in mind that just like today, when we think we're making significant breakthroughs, and when we think that these breakthroughs should be widely adapted, this is a cartoon from the same period that you can't read the bottom, but it says the wonderful effects of the new inoculation. And you can see about the only person there that seems to be relaxed is Jenner. And we've got people with cow heads coming up over here, and we've got people with cows coming out their butt, and we've got, so even at that time, these sorts of technologies were shunned and these technologies were ridiculed, and pushing forward these kinds of breakthroughs that we do isn't always easy. So we have to ask ourselves, So then, as we've advanced through a wide variety of a step-by-step process of optimizing and modernizing this approach. This happens to be a shot from the Institut Mérieux. I can validate that this is from the Institut Mérieux because you'll see that gentleman in the corner in the black and white shot wearing a beret. And this is the Frankel method of FMD production. And FMD production was always associated with a slaughterhouse or an abattoir because these are cow tongues that are laid over these cooling vessels, and the tongues were inoculated, and X number of days afterwards they were scraped, and the vaccine was made from that material. Relatively shortly thereafter, we moved into what we consider to be modern biotechnology and large-scale fermentation and growth of viral and bacterial vaccines. You can see, sadly, you can no longer wear a beret in manufacturing. You now have to wear a hard hat. And interestingly enough, even coming full circle, to realize that now with some of these new technologies, growing baculovirus in silkworms. In China, by the way, is a vaccine in China produced from squashed insect larvae for FMD that actually works really reasonably well. There are also some other biotherapeutic products in Japan using silkworms, baculovirus from silkworms, and of course PCV2 is using the more advanced industrial process of insect cells. So if we're going to go to all of these different steps using what I try to use the term advanced enabling technologies, so you don't say GMOs, you don't say new adjuvants, you don't say new advanced enabling technologies to overcome the shortcomings of some of these conventional vaccines that we've been working with for decades. Not that there's something wrong with every one of those vaccines. Those vets in the crowd that received the rabies vaccination in vet school, you've probably still got pretty good titers right now. Some inactivated, some conventional vaccines don't need improvement for the specific need. Some of you who own horses and vaccinate your horses 3 times a year for avian or for equine influenza also know that some of those technologies are flawed or not adequate for the purpose. So many of the areas that we attempt to address with advanced enabling technologies are to overcome maternal antibody interference. I have many different examples, and by the way, it's interesting, I think many of the topics that I'll touch here we've attempted to address, and I think successfully address with the Barricade product, but to get around maternal antibodies, to improve the safety of those traditional classical vaccines. It's always a safety-efficacy balance, and sometimes it tilts one side or the other. Using subunit vaccines or using different routes of administration to be able to overcome those shortcomings is important. Differential diagnostic, of course, is extremely important, and pseudorabies being probably the first good example of being able to use advanced technologies to come up with a differential diagnostic to help to control diseases is critical. Chronic or otherwise unaddressable targets, parasites, cancer targets, chronic diseases. You may or may not know also, there are now probably 5 cancer vaccines on the market for dogs in the United States. So using a different range of these technologies. Bringing the product quickly to the marketplace, whether it's dropping in new genes or whether it's taking advantage of modern autogenous or custom-made vaccination programs, I think is critical. And of course, improved routes of administration, whether it's in ovo administration for eggs, transdermal, needle-free, and in our case, obviously, intranasal. So, what have we done here at Aptimmune, and how do we take advantage of these opportunities? This is a solution to the problem that we haven't been able to get a good EM shot of the virus, and so here's an arteriovirus, artist rendition that we have. And Steve already talked to you about the nanoparticles. So these very uniform, consistent beads that we use to then have the virus adhere to those particles, followed by the mixing with the mycobacterial cell wall components. What we've attempted to do and what we've tried to capture with this photo is show you that this thing looks like an invading microorganism, right? It's got all of those components on that. It's about the size of a bacteria, and it's of a good-sized normal bacteria. It's got all those viral antigens, and it's got good adjuvant stimulatory activity built on into the wall. The evidence that this works, many of you have seen this picture before, is the fact that when you use the nanoparticle with the PRRS antigen attached to it, you get normal uptake into macrophages, as opposed to the traditional killed virus on the side. Many of you have seen this clean a pig's nose before. And so we then put it up the nose, in through the nares, and up to that mucosal barrier is really where the magic happens here. So in that mucosal barrier, we have not only normal cells in the epithelium, but interspaced in there's a cell called an M cell. And that M cell is designed to be able to compartmentalize the antigen, bring the antigen through to these dendritic cells. The dendritic cells are the coordinator of the orchestra. The dendritic cells, by the way, are largely passed by when you stick a needle into the muscle. By the way, when you do a transdermal delivery device, those dendritic cells are stimulated. And in the nasal and in the gut mucosa, they're also stimulated. So those dendritic cells are then able to target or to coordinate with T cells and B cells, the ability to make T helper cells, T killer cells, and B cells that produce not only IgG, but also in this case exclusively secretory IgA. That secretory IgA, of course, is then critical for the eventual processing of the virus in an effective response. And importantly, too, IgA has been demonstrated in several different models and several different species to have a broader capability of recognizing different antigenic variations in a virus. And this cartoon then shows two slight variants. The IgA, the secretory IgA, is able to recognize and bind to the different strains, whereas the IgG cannot. Also, as far as trafficking is concerned, it's important to point out that when you stimulate through the nasal-associated lymphoid tissue, the NALT, you stimulate cells that have surface markers on them that allow them to coordinate and pass through the rest of the associated lymphoid tract and into the lungs. And these particular cell markers allow those immune cells to pass from the vasculature down through that interstitium and into the airways to be able to interact with the virus when it comes in. Clearly and has been demonstrated, when you inject in the muscle, those same cell markers are not present. You're not able to get that transition back in through the important aspects of the respiratory system. How do we know this? How do we know that it works? When vaccinated and then later taking bronchial alveolar lavage fluids, and in this case, Formula A and Formula B are presented intranasally. IM control is a vaccine we'll talk a little bit about the next slide. Looking at IgA and those fluids, we see, and in this case, Formula B being the barricade formulation, we see elevated and statistically higher levels of IgA. When we look at that same group and we look for IgG, the IM control, of course, has got high levels of, and by the way, demonstrates the fact that this was a pretty good vaccine that we used. High levels of IgG in the blood, where you don't see it with either of our intranasal presentations. What's the consequence? What's the significance of that? In this case, we're looking at viruses in the lungs. You can see here a percentage of animals that are positive. But I think probably most importantly, you can also see the average log titer there in each of the in each of the groups. So a significant reduction in the viruses and a significant reduction in the numbers of pigs that are positive. Taking it to the next stage, we can see here healthy lungs in the upper corner, nanoparticle vaccination lungs in the opposite corner, and killed and unvaccinated consolidation of lung tissue in those other. And also, as we mentioned before, this was a heterologous PRRS strain challenge. We suggested before that the IgA is superior in its ability to recognize viral variants. What does this mean clinically? We're going to see for the rest of the much of the rest of the presentation what it means economically, but what does it mean clinically in this study? We can see a significant reduction in any respiratory signs, but most critically with severe respiratory signs in these groups, where you can see no reaction in the barricade PRRS green bars. So, I've attempted to get all of this into 20 minutes. Have I done that? And what we've attempted to do is point out that it's not simple. My takeaway message is, it's not simple to make this vaccine. It's a lot easier to just go ahead and grow it, kill it, grind it, and pop it in oil. But in this disease situation, I happened to be at Beringer in 1996 when we launched the first PRRS vaccine. It's taken a good 20 years for us to come up with a unique, novel, and I think a superior solution to this disease. And I hope you can appreciate now some of the thought and rationale that's gone into how we came up with that. If there's any questions, I'll be happy to answer them now or later.
Yeah.
Ma'am.
You said that you used that was a heterologous challenge. What strains did you use to challenge with?
I'll ask somebody that was doing the study. The question was, in this case, a heterologous challenge in this study. No, in this study?
That study was 86% molecule.
But we'll get you the strains later.
So we put that intranasal in negative gilts at 21 days, let's say. Yeah, if we put that intranasal in negative gilts at 21 days of age, how long would we expect that immune response to be able to respond to them once they got into a cell and became second, third, fourth, fifth pericells? Would that always be with them?
So what's the duration of immunity in that particular? We have not carried those studies out. But everything that we know about mucosal stimulating the mucosal system is that response can last as long or longer than a traditional IM injection. Obviously, 2 administrations are going to be better than 1 for duration, but we haven't carried out that duration study.
What's your expectation for onset of immunity?
Expectations on onset of immunity in an intranasal or mucosal response is that it will be shorter than a traditional injected, or perhaps more like a live administration. You don't go through the IgM and then the IgG cycling and expect 14 or 21 days of onset. We have evidence, I think, that'll be brought out later on in the afternoon that'll indicate it's days. We have not done, just like we haven't done an onset of immunity challenge study, but less than a week.
Can I ask just a quick question? From a compliance standpoint, what's the ability to measure IgM or IgA post-vaccination?
So that's a great question. We've talked about that with a couple of folks. If I understand, to make sure if we vaccinate and come back and look at a test kit, can we demonstrate the pigs have been vaccinated? The data that we've got so far indicate probably not. I'll let Jessica or somebody else comment on that. It's been a while since I've been close to that. What I would suggest is that and other folks have been interested in that from the aspect of do they stay, if they do turn positive, have they seen virus as well? So you could almost use it as a differential diagnostic. But high levels of circulating IgM or IgG following vaccination, you're not going to see.